The dusty stagecoach lurched to a stop outside Copper Ridge's single main street, sending a cloud of red earth swirling into the blazing Arizona sun. Eleanor Whitmore clutched her worn leather satchel tighter, her knuckles white beneath her faded cotton gloves. Through the grimy window, she could see a town that looked nothing like the bustling frontier settlement James Henderson had described in his letters. Instead of the thriving community he'd promised, Copper Ridge appeared half-deserted. Windows were boarded shut, and yellow cloth hung from several doorways, a warning she recognized all too well from her nursing training back in Philadelphia. Her heart sank as the familiar dread crept up her spine. "End of the line, miss," the gruff driver called down, avoiding her eyes as he tossed her trunk to the ground with unnecessary force. Eleanor stepped down onto the wooden sidewalk, her traveling dress dusty and wrinkled after 3 days of hard riding. The oppressive heat hit her immediately, but it was the eerie silence that made her skin crawl. No children playing, no women chatting on porches, no sounds of commerce or daily life. Just the whisper of wind through empty streets and the distant tolling of a church bell. "You the mail-order bride?" The voice came from behind her, deep and weary. Eleanor turned to see a tall man approaching, his dark hair disheveled and his white shirt rolled up at the sleeves. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his face bore the haggard expression of someone who hadn't slept properly in weeks. Yes, I'm Eleanor Whitmore. I'm looking for James Henderson." Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. The man's expression grew somber. "I'm Dr. Samuel Martinez. I'm afraid I have some difficult news about James." Eleanor's stomach dropped. She'd traveled over 2,000 miles, spent her last dollars on this journey, burned bridges she could never rebuild. Is he dead? 3 days ago. The fever took him quick. Dr. Martinez removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing." The words hit her like a physical blow. Eleanor sank onto her trunk, fighting back tears of exhaustion and despair. She had nowhere to go, no money for return passage, and now she was stranded in a plague-ridden frontier town. "What kind of fever?" she asked quietly, though she already suspected the answer. "We're not entirely sure. Starts with chills and headache, then high fever, delirium. Some recover, but—" He gestured vaguely toward the yellow-marked houses. "Too many don't." Eleanor closed her eyes, memories flooding back unbidden. The overcrowded hospital wards in Philadelphia. The endless rows of bodies. Her own helplessness as patient after patient succumbed to diseases she couldn't cure or even properly understand. She'd fled west to escape those haunting images, only to find herself facing the same nightmare. "Miss Whitmore," Dr. Martinez's voice was gentle. "I know this isn't what you planned, but the town could use your help. James mentioned in his letters that you had some medical training." She looked up sharply. "He told you about me. Small town, not much happens that folks don't talk about, especially something as exciting as a mail-order bride." A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered features. "He was proud as punch, showing everyone your letters, telling us about your nursing experience back east." Heat crept up Eleanor's neck. James had shared her personal correspondence with the entire town. "I'm not a real nurse," she said quickly. I helped out during some difficult times, that's all." It wasn't entirely a lie. She had helped during the typhoid outbreak that claimed her parents and younger brother. She'd assisted the overworked doctors, changed bandages, spooned broth into fevered mouths. But she'd also watched helplessly as people died despite her efforts, had nightmares about the sounds they made, the way hope faded from their families' eyes. "Right now, any medical experience is more than most folks in this town have," Dr. Martinez said. "I'm the only doctor for 50 miles, and I can't be everywhere at once. The townspeople are scared, suspicious of outsiders, but you—" He studied her face. "James vouched for you. That carries weight here. I don't know if I can—" "There's a boarding house 2 blocks down. Mrs. Chen runs it, and she's been looking for help since her daughter took sick. Room and board in exchange for work." He picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "Just think about it. No pressure." As they walked down the eerily quiet main street, Eleanor noticed more details that confirmed her worst fears. Lime scattered near several doorsteps, the acrid smell of burning sulfur drifting from behind buildings, a woman hurrying past with a handkerchief pressed to her nose, her eyes darting nervously toward them. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "About a month. Started with the miners coming down from the mountain camps. We thought it was just exhaustion at first, maybe too much time in bad air underground. But then it spread to their families, to folks who'd never set foot near the mines." They stopped in front of a neat 2-story building with a hand-painted sign reading Chen's Boarding House. Despite the yellow cloth draped across one upper window, the front porch was swept clean and flower boxes held struggling but determined blooms. "Mrs. Chen," Dr. Martinez called out. "I've brought Miss Whitmore." The front door opened to reveal a small, elegant Chinese woman in her 50s. Her black hair was streaked with silver and pulled back in a practical bun. She looked Eleanor up and down with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to see everything. "So you are the bride who comes too late," she said in accented but clear English. "James, he talked about you much. Said you were smart, capable." She paused. "Said you had gentle hands for healing." Eleanor felt the familiar tightness in her chest. "Mrs. Chen, I should explain. I'm not really a trained nurse. You helped people when they needed help," Mrs. Chen interrupted. "That is what matters now. Come, I show you room. Dr. Martinez, you eat something before you fall down. You are no good to anyone if you collapse." The interior of the boarding house was spotless and surprisingly comfortable. The main floor held a dining room, sitting area, and kitchen that smelled of ginger and something savory simmering on the stove. Mrs. Chen led Eleanor upstairs, past a closed door marked with yellow cloth. "My daughter, Li Ming, Mrs." Chen explained quietly. "She is better today. Fever broke this morning, but still very weak." Eleanor's room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, washstand, and window that looked out over the town's main street. Mrs. Chen set her trunk down with effort. "You rest now. Tonight you help serve dinner to boarders. We have 3 men, all healthy so far. Tomorrow." She shrugged. "Tomorrow we see what tomorrow brings." After Mrs. Chen left, Eleanor sat on the bed and finally allowed herself to cry. Quiet tears of exhaustion, loss, and fear. James Henderson had been her lifeline, her chance at a new beginning, far from the memories that haunted her Eastern life. Now he was dead, and she was trapped in another plague-stricken community, expected to help when she'd already proven herself useless against disease and death. A soft knock interrupted her self-pity. "Miss Whitmore?" Dr. Martinez's voice came through the door. "I'm sorry to bother you, but there's been an accident at the Jameson place. I could really use an extra pair of hands." Eleanor wiped her eyes quickly. "What kind of accident?" "Mining accident. Cave-in trapped 2 men. We got them out, but one has a compound fracture of the leg. The other has chest injuries. I can't treat them both simultaneously." She stared at the door, paralyzed by competing impulses. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to avoid the inevitable moment when someone would die despite her efforts. But another part of her, the part that had driven her to help during the Philadelphia outbreak, whispered that people were suffering. I don't have any supplies with me. I have everything we need. I just need someone who won't faint at the sight of blood and can follow instructions." Eleanor took a shaky breath. "Give me 2 minutes." The Jameson homestead sat a half-mile outside town, a modest ranch house surrounded by outbuildings and mining equipment. As they approached in Dr. Martinez's wagon, Eleanor could hear men shouting and a woman's high-pitched crying. Inside, chaos reigned. 2 injured miners lay on the kitchen table and floor respectively, while their families and fellow workers clustered around, everyone talking at once. Blood stained the wooden floor, and the air reeked of fierce sweat and dirt. "Everyone out except immediate family," Dr. Martinez commanded, his voice cutting through the noise. "Mrs. Jameson, I need hot water, clean towels, and lamp oil for better light." Eleanor found herself moving almost without conscious thought, her hands checking pulses and breathing, while her mind cataloged injuries. The man on the table had an ugly break in his lower leg, bone protruding through torn flesh. The one on the floor was conscious but breathing shallowly, his lips tinged blue. "The chest injury is more urgent," she said quietly to Dr. Martinez. "Possible pneumothorax?" He looked at her with surprise and respect. "Exactly what I was thinking. Can you stabilize the leg fracture while I deal with his breathing?" For the next 2 hours, Eleanor found herself functioning on pure training and instinct. She cleaned wounds, held instruments, monitored vital signs, and even assisted with a procedure to relieve pressure in the chest cavity. It wasn't until they were loading both patients into the wagon for transport back to town that she realized her hands had stopped shaking. "You did well," Dr. Martinez said as they drove through the darkness. "Where exactly did you train?" "I didn't, not formally. During the typhoid outbreak in Philadelphia, the hospitals were overwhelmed. They took anyone willing to help." She hesitated. "I lost my parents and brother in that outbreak. After that, I couldn't stay. Too many memories. But you helped people. I tried. Mostly I just watched them die." The old bitterness crept into her voice. "I'm not cut out for medical work, Dr. Martinez. Tonight was luck." "Samuel," he corrected. "And what I saw tonight wasn't luck. It was skill and composure under pressure. Those men are going to recover because you knew what to do." Eleanor didn't respond. She'd heard similar praise before, had even believed it briefly, until the next wave of deaths proved her inadequacy. They spent the next hour getting the patients settled, one in Samuel's makeshift clinic, the other in his own home where his wife could monitor him closely. Eleanor learned that Samuel was originally from Santa Fe, had come to Copper Ridge 2 years earlier, when the mining boom promised prosperity and the need for medical services. "What about your family?" Eleanor asked as they walked back toward the boarding house. "My wife Maria died in childbirth last year. The baby, too." His voice was matter-of-fact, but Eleanor heard the pain underneath. "So it's just me now, trying to keep this town alive. I'm sorry. Life out here is hard. We all lose people." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Eleanor, I meant what I said earlier. This town needs you. Not just because we're short-handed, but because you understand medicine in a way most people don't." "I understand failure," she said quietly. "I understand watching people die despite everything you do." "Then you understand the most important part. The people who make the best healers are the ones who know how precious and fragile life is." The next morning, Eleanor woke to the sound of urgent knocking. Mrs. Chen's voice called through the door. "Miss Eleanor, come quickly. Dr. Martinez needs you." She dressed hurriedly and found Samuel waiting in the boarding house kitchen, his medical bag in hand. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he hadn't slept. "3 new cases overnight," he said without preamble. "All in the same family, the Weatherby place, about 2 miles south of town." As they rode out in the pre-dawn darkness, Samuel filled her in on the details. The Weatherby family consisted of parents and 4 children, ranging from 6 to 16. All but the youngest had developed fever during the night. "I need you to help me assess and treat them," Samuel said. "But Eleanor, there's something else. I think I know what we're dealing with, and it's not good news." "What do you mean?" "I've been corresponding with doctors in Denver and Santa Fe, comparing symptoms and progression. I think this might be Rocky Mountain spotted fever." Eleanor's blood chilled. She'd heard of the disease, a tick-borne illness that killed a significant percentage of its victims. "You're certain?" "Not entirely, but the symptom progression matches, and we've had an unusually wet spring followed by hot weather. Perfect conditions for tick populations to explode." The Weatherby homestead was a scene of barely controlled panic. Mrs. Weatherby met them at the door, her own skin flushed with fever but her eyes sharp with maternal determination. "Thank God you're here, doctor." They all took sick around midnight, chills, headaches, throwing up. Little Sarah seems fine so far, but the others. She led them inside where her family lay on improvised beds throughout the main room. Eleanor moved methodically from patient to patient, taking temperatures and pulses, while Samuel examined each one more thoroughly. The symptoms were consistent: high fever, severe headache, muscle aches, and in 2 cases, a distinctive spotted rash beginning to appear on wrists and ankles. "How long since any of you were in tall grass or wooded areas?" Samuel asked Mrs. Weatherby. "The boys go hunting most days. Martha here helps her father with cattle. We all spend time outdoors." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You think it's something they picked up outside?" "Possibly. Have you noticed any tick bites recently?" The family exchanged glances. In this environment, tick bites were so common they barely merited attention. But now Eleanor watched as they began examining arms and legs, finding several small healing bite marks. Over the next several hours, Eleanor found herself falling into a rhythm she remembered from Philadelphia. Cool compresses for fever, careful monitoring of breathing and pulse, small sips of water for those who could keep it down. Samuel administered what medications he had: aspirin for pain and fever, laudanum for the worst cases. But it was clear they were fighting a losing battle. By midday, the youngest boy's fever had spiked dangerously high, and he'd begun having seizures. Eleanor held him during the worst of it, her own memories threatening to overwhelm her as his small body convulsed in her arms. "There has to be something more we can do," she whispered to Samuel during a brief moment when all the patients were resting. "If it is spotted fever, the mortality rate is about 20% with good care, without proper treatment." He didn't finish the sentence. What would proper treatment look like? "Clean facilities, round-the-clock nursing, better medications than what I have access to out here." He rubbed his eyes wearily. "Eleanor, I need to be honest with you. If this spreads much further, I'm not sure we can contain it. The town doesn't have the resources for a major outbreak." Eleanor looked around the crowded room at the suffering family. Mrs. Weatherby was trying to care for her other children despite her own illness. The oldest daughter, Martha, was delirious with fever, but kept trying to get up to help her mother. The scene was achingly familiar: desperation, exhaustion, the gradual erosion of hope. "I can't do this again," she said quietly. "What?" "Watch people die, watch families destroyed. I came west to escape this, and here it is again." Tears threatened, but she held them back. "I should go back to town. You don't need me here." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, then he said, "Do you see that little girl over there? Sarah?" Eleanor looked at the 6-year-old who sat in the corner, wide-eyed but healthy, trying to understand why her entire world had suddenly turned frightening and chaotic. "She's probably going to lose most of her family in the next few days," Samuel continued. "Her parents, maybe all her siblings. When that happens, she'll need people who understand what it's like to survive when everyone else doesn't. People who know how to carry that kind of grief and still function." "That's not fair," Eleanor whispered. "None of this is fair, but running away won't change anything. Those people in Philadelphia, did they suffer less because you left?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Eleanor knew the answer. The suffering continued whether she witnessed it or not. Her leaving hadn't saved anyone. It had just left fewer hands to help. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Good. Fear keeps you careful. The doctors who aren't scared are the dangerous ones. They take risks that get people killed." Over the next 3 days, Eleanor learned the true meaning of exhaustion. She and Samuel took turns staying with the Weatherby family, monitoring conditions, administering care, and trying to keep everyone as comfortable as possible. Mrs. Chen sent supplies and hot meals, while other townspeople contributed blankets, medicine, and prayers. Eleanor watched Samuel work with a combination of admiration and growing affection. He was endlessly patient with frightened children, gentle with suffering adults, and never showed the despair she knew he must be feeling. When young Tommy Weatherby's seizures worsened and it became clear he wouldn't survive, Samuel held the boy's mother while she sobbed, then helped prepare the small body with dignity and care. "How do you do it?" Eleanor asked him that night as they sat on the Weatherby porch, too tired to return to town, but too wired to sleep. "Do what?" "Keep going when you can't save them all." Samuel was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "When Maria died, I wanted to quit medicine entirely. Felt like my knowledge was useless when it mattered most. But then I realized something. The people I couldn't save aren't the measure of my worth as a doctor. The ones I can save are. But how do you know the difference? How do you know when to keep fighting and when to let go? You don't, not always. That's the hardest part. But you keep trying, because giving up guarantees failure. On the fourth day, Martha Weatherby's fever broke. She woke clear-eyed and asking for water, the first positive sign they'd had. By evening, her father's temperature had also begun to drop. Mrs. Weatherby, though still weak, was able to sit up and feed herself. "They're going to make it," Samuel told Eleanor as they packed up their supplies. 3 out of 5. Not perfect, but better than I feared. Eleanor felt something she hadn't experienced since leaving Philadelphia, a sense of accomplishment tinged with hope rather than despair. Yes, they'd lost 2 members of the family and the survivors faced a long recovery, but 3 people were alive who might not have been without their intervention. As they drove back to town, Samuel said, "I have a proposition for you." "Oh?" "Copper Ridge needs a permanent nurse, someone to help with routine medical care, assist during emergencies, teach basic health and sanitation practices. The town council has been discussing it since this outbreak started." Eleanor's heart began to race. "I told you I'm not a trained nurse. You're better than most trained nurses I've worked with. More importantly, you care about the patients as people, not just cases to be treated." "What about James? I came here to marry him." "James is gone, but that doesn't mean you can't build a life here." Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop just outside town and turned to face her. "Eleanor, I've seen you work. You have natural instincts, steady hands, and the kind of empathy that can't be taught. With some formal training, you could be exceptional." The idea terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "I don't have money for medical school. There are nursing programs that take students with practical experience. Some even provide financial assistance. I know people in Denver and Santa Fe who could help." Eleanor stared out at the lights of Copper Ridge, this little town that had become her unexpected refuge. In Philadelphia, she'd felt helpless and overwhelmed. Here, despite the fear and uncertainty, she discovered something she'd thought lost forever, the ability to make a real difference in people's lives. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course, but Eleanor, don't let fear make the decision for you." Over the next week, as the Weatherby family continued their recovery and no new cases appeared in town, Eleanor found herself settling into a routine at the boarding house. She helped Mrs. Chen with daily tasks, assisted Samuel with patient visits, and began teaching basic first aid and hygiene practices to some of the town women. Mrs. Chen's daughter, Li Ming, had recovered completely from her fever and proved to be an eager student. At 19, she was bright, curious about medicine, and fluent in both English and Cantonese, a valuable skill in a territory with a growing Chinese population. "You could teach her," Samuel suggested one evening as they watched Li Ming practice bandaging techniques on a willing patient, the boarding house cat. "Informal apprenticeship while you're getting your own training." Eleanor realized she'd already begun thinking of Copper Ridge as home. The initial terror of arriving in a plague-stricken town had given way to a sense of purpose she'd never experienced. These people needed her skills, limited as they were, and she was beginning to believe she might actually be good at this work. "The town council met yesterday," Mrs. Chen announced over dinner. "They voted to offer you official position, town nurse with salary and housing, if you want it." Eleanor looked around the table at the faces that had become familiar over the past 2 weeks. The 3 male boarders, a shopkeeper, a mine foreman, and a traveling salesman who'd been stranded by a broken wagon, all nodded encouragingly. Samuel smiled that gentle, slightly lopsided smile she'd grown to appreciate. Mrs. Chen and Li Ming watched her expectantly. "What about training?" Eleanor asked. Samuel mentioned programs in Denver. "We talked to nursing school there," Mrs. Chen said, producing a letter from her apron pocket. "They accept students with practical experience for accelerated program. 6 months of intensive study, then return here to work while completing remainder of coursework by correspondence." Eleanor read the letter with growing excitement. The program was exactly what Samuel had described. intensive practical training designed for students who already had field experience. The cost was manageable, especially with the town council's offer to provide partial sponsorship in exchange for a commitment to serve as Copper Ridge's nurse for at least 2 years after graduation. "I have one condition," Eleanor said, surprising herself with her decisiveness. "What's that?" Samuel asked. "Li Ming comes with me to Denver for the training. She's bright, dedicated, and this town needs more than one person with medical knowledge." Mrs. Chen's eyes filled with tears of pride. Li Ming gasped in excitement, chattering rapidly in Cantonese before switching back to English. "You would do this? Take me with you? If your mother agrees and the school accepts you, yes. We'll both come back as qualified nurses." Samuel reached across the table and squeezed Eleanor's hand. "James would be proud of you. He wanted to bring someone special to Copper Ridge, and he succeeded, just not the way any of us expected." That night, Eleanor sat by her window looking out at the town that had become her unexpected salvation. 2 weeks ago, she'd arrived as a displaced mail-order bride, fleeing memories of medical failure and personal loss. Tonight, she was a woman with a future she'd never imagined, one built on skills she'd tried to abandon, and a calling she was finally ready to embrace. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Eleanor?" Samuel's voice came through the door. "May I speak with you?" She opened the door to find him standing in the hallway, hat in hand, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I wanted to talk to you before you make your final decision about Denver," he said. "All right. When you come back as a qualified nurse, I hope you'll consider. That is, I was wondering if you might be interested in—" He stopped, running a hand through his hair in frustration. "I'm making a mess of this." Eleanor felt her heart begin to race. "Samuel? I've grown very fond of you, Eleanor. More than fond. I know it's soon, and I know you came here for someone else, but I was hoping that maybe, when you return from your training, you might consider building more than just a professional partnership with me." She studied his face, the kind eyes that had seen too much suffering, the gentle hands that worked tirelessly to heal, the quiet strength that had sustained an entire community through crisis. James Henderson had been a stranger who offered her escape from her past. Samuel Martinez was a friend who offered her a future she actually wanted. "Are you asking me to marry you, Dr. Martinez?" "I'm asking you to think about it while you're in Denver. No pressure, no expectations, just consideration." Eleanor stepped closer, close enough to see the hope and uncertainty in his dark eyes. "I don't need to think about it, Samuel. The answer is yes." His smile was like sunrise after a long, dark night. When he kissed her, gentle and tentative at first, then with growing confidence as she responded, Eleanor felt the last of her fears about the future melt away. She'd come to Copper Ridge as a mail-order bride fleeing her past. She was staying as a woman who'd found her calling and her heart in the most unlikely place imaginable. 6 months later, Eleanor and Li Ming returned from Denver as certified nurses, ready to serve a town that had become their home. Eleanor married Samuel in a simple ceremony at the church, with Mrs. Chen standing as matron of honor and Li Ming as bridesmaid. The plague that had brought Eleanor to Samuel never returned to Copper Ridge, but their partnership, professional and personal, became the foundation for a medical practice that served the growing territory for decades to come. They trained other nurses, established a proper clinic, and became known throughout Arizona territory for their compassionate, skilled care. Eleanor never forgot the fears that had nearly driven her away from medicine, but she learned to use them as a source of strength rather than paralysis. In the end, running toward her fears instead of away from them had led her to everything she'd never dared to hope for: meaningful work, true love, and a home where her past pain had been transformed into present purpose.